Fire sounds different when you're the kindling. It isn't a roar at first. It's a whisper under the floorboards, a sly crackle like teeth testing a walnut. I was alone in the one-room cabin as smoke braided up from the gaps in the pine planks and licked the hem of my wool skirt. The door didn't budge when I threw my shoulder into it. The metal latch on the outside rattled like laughter. Through the tiny window, I saw two silhouettes moving toward the truck at the tree line, my daughter's slight frame and the broad, careful shoulders of my son-in-law. He turned once, looked back toward the porch where he'd forgotten to bring in the firewood, and then the truck door opened. I pounded my fist on the glass until my knuckles stung. The mountains swallowed my voice. It was sundown and the snow was pink and quiet, and I was a 78-year-old woman trapped in a tinderbox, trying to outthink a younger man who believed he'd already won. If you're wondering how a grandmother ends up in a burning cabin while $5 billion hangs in the balance, the short answer is love made me generous and grief made me slow. The long answer began 3 months earlier, with a signature, a promise, and a smile that never reached his eyes. My name is Margaret Whitfield, but everyone calls me Maggie. I married Thomas Whitfield in 1968, when he still carried his slide rule in a leather case and dreamed about building something that outlasted us both. He did. We started a research lab in a rented warehouse and grew it into Whitfield Therapeutics, a biotech firm that saved more lives than it could count. When Thomas passed, the company sold, and after endowments, buyouts, and a stitched quilt of trusts, I became something men in suits call a controlling party. I don't sit in boardrooms now, not often, but let me be plain, I sign things that move markets. Between the Whitfield Family Holding Company and the Whitfield Foundation, I sign off on the keys that open and shut almost $5 billion. I have 2 children, Claire, my daughter, and James, my son. Claire married a man named Ethan Cole. He is handsome in the way magazine ads are handsome, all straight teeth and quiet haircuts, the kind of man who compliments the server and remembers birthdays because that is what good men do. He tells stories well and listens better. People trust him in under a minute. He runs a family advisory firm that no family I respect would ever use. I tried to love him, for Claire's sake. I set my skepticism on a high shelf and told myself I was being old-fashioned, suspicious because the world moved faster now than it did when Thomas and I were soldering circuits on the kitchen table. But then small things went missing. Not money at first, keys. A login note that used to be in my blue folder was suddenly filed under green. My phone autofill, once trained to my careful typos, began to insist I'd spelled a code I never used. A password hint appeared that I hadn't written, wedding day. The only person who asked me about our wedding day more than once was Ethan. When I told Ben Harper, my attorney of 40 years, he rubbed the bridge of his nose and spoke as gently as a man shoving you out of the way of a bus. Maggie, I want you to assume nothing is an accident. And I want you to act like you're wrong until we prove you're right. So I did. I lost my phone and replaced it. I stopped keeping keys in bowls by the door. I set up a dead man timer on the foundation vault, a quiet heartbeat that required my face, my passphrase, and a physical tap every 72 hours. If I missed it, funds moved. Not to Ethan. To scholarships and clinics and housing repairs our board had already voted through but paused for sequencing. If I vanished, my money wouldn't. Then Claire called one Wednesday in January with her voice bright the way it gets when she's bearing news she is afraid I won't like. Mom? We want to take you up to the cabin this weekend. Just the 3 of us. Ethan says the air will do you good. The cabin sits at the edge of Table Rock Ridge, 1 mile before the road forgets it's a road. Thomas built it with his hands when our backs were strong and our patience was stronger. No cell service. No television. Just a wood stove, a pot of coffee, and a sky so big it makes your thoughts small. I love that cabin like a 4th grandchild. I'd like that, I lied. But only if I can bring Rosa. Rosa has been with me for 10 years. She started as a home nurse after my hip surgery and stayed when I realized her true job was to tell me the truth. She is 52, with a braid like a rope and a laugh that fills a room. She sees the crumbs people don't know they leave. Of course, Claire said quickly, and then she added too quickly, but Ethan says it might be good for us to have time. You know. To talk through the estate paperwork without extra ears. The word estate is an elevator that takes polite people to the basement. I felt the drop in my stomach. Then we'll meet in town first, I said. Rosa can do groceries. I'll come up after. I called Ben. He didn't like it. I'll drive behind you, he said. No, I answered. If I'm wrong, I'm a paranoid old woman dragging my lawyer to family weekend. If I'm right, you and Rosa will have everything you need. He hesitated. Everything. I opened the top drawer of Thomas's desk and took out a small homely brooch in the shape of a dogwood flower. Thomas used to say, "Pretty things can hide ugly secrets." I flipped it. In the back where the clasp should be, a tiny black dot looked like a flaw in the metal. The brooch recorded audio for 8 hours and dropped files into my cloud the moment it found a signal. It was a silly purchase when I made it. Now it felt like a seatbelt. Before dawn Saturday, Rosa pressed a paper bag into my hands. "Thermos of soup," she said, "and the thing you asked for." The thing I asked for was a trail camera the shape of a tobacco tin. Hunters use them to count deer. I use them to remember who means me harm. When Ethan and Claire picked me up, he was perfect. He lifted my luggage as if it weighed nothing and told me I looked radiant, which is a word magazines use for women my age when they don't want to say fragile. Claire sat close in the truck, her fingers spidering over mine, and told me Noah, my grandson, had made the basketball team. For a moment, I let myself be only a grandmother in a truck with people I loved, driving toward a cabin where my life had been kind and simple. For a moment, I was happy. Snow started at the turnoff. By the time we reached the cabin, the world was a postcard. Ethan chopped wood like a man in an advertisement for flannel. I watched him from the porch as he stacked the logs beside the door, but not too close, his movements careful, measured. He kept glancing at the roofline, the eaves, the cracks where the oldest boards winked. He was inventorying. Not firewood. Ventilation. Inside, Claire fussed with blankets and shelves. "Let me see the new papers, Mom," she said, light and brisk. "Ethan wants to make sure the trusteeship lines up with the timeline." "What timeline?" I asked. "The one where you don't have to worry anymore," she said, and I realized my daughter had learned to say sentences that didn't mean anything. We ate stew and played cards. At dusk, the wind died, and the cold fell like a stone. Ethan stoked the fire until it danced and then made a show of checking the flue with his palm. "All clear," he said and winked. "Can't be too careful." After supper, he suggested I rest. Claire pressed a kiss to my forehead. "We're going to run to town," she said. "The propane is low. We'll be back in an hour." "Take the thermos," I said, handing it to her so I could feel the weight of her hand. Her fingers were cold. She didn't meet my eyes. When the truck engine faded, the cabin was a heartbeat and a clock. I stood and moved the way Rosa taught me, slow enough not to look like hurry, fast enough not to die. The dogwood brooch sat neat on my collar. I pressed the center with my thumb until it hummed against my skin. Recording. I set the trail cam on the windowsill with the lens facing the porch. Then I opened the stove and watched the logs. They burned clean. Ethan is careful. Careful doesn't always mean kind. The first smoke came from the back wall, low and sly. The second came from the cracks along the baseboard near the door. I knelt, pressed my palm to the plank, and felt a warmth that wasn't from the stove. I grabbed the kettle and poured a slow line of water along the seam. The hiss told me what I needed to know: there was fire crawling under the floor. I went to the door and lifted the latch. It didn't lift. From the outside, something metal clicked against the plate. "Ethan doesn't forget. He plans." He had braced the latch with a hasp I couldn't reach. My heart beat in my throat, but fear is a dog, you can teach it to sit. I scanned the room. The windows were narrow. The glass was old. The hinges were not. I slid the table under the south window, climbed, and slammed the heel of my hand near the lock. The wood cracked but held. Smoke thickened. Heat pressed close to the floor, then began to rise. I wrapped my scarf over my nose and mouth and made a second strike harder, the way Rosa smacks garlic to make it listen. The window stuttered in the frame but didn't break. Outside, through the wavering pane, I saw movement. Ethan's broad shoulders and Claire's blue parka at the edge of the trees. They weren't gone to town at all. They were waiting for the math to finish. Fire plus old wood plus no cell service equals inheritance. Ethan turned toward the porch, then away, then back again, as if debating courage. The wind shifted and carried a thin thread of his voice toward me. I couldn't hear words. The brooch might. I climbed down, coughing, and grabbed the iron poker. The first strike shattered the bottom corner of the glass. Cold air knifed in, smoke hissed out. I smashed again until I could reach the latch from the outside with the hooked end of the poker. It was clumsy work, but I have raised babies and companies. My hands remember how to fix things. The latch gave a little. Not enough. I crouched low, years of fire drills from the lab kicking like an old song. Crawl where the air is sweetest. Breathe small. Count. I belly crawled to the wood stove, grabbed 2 wool blankets, and dunked them in the kettle one after another until they were heavy and steaming. I pressed them along the hot seams at the baseboard and under the door to slow the crawl underneath. The floorboards ticked like bones. Then I did the oddest thing of all. I sat in the chair beside the stove, lifted my chin, and talked. Not to Ethan, he couldn't hear me, but to the brooch on my collar and the camera on the sill and the part of me that refused to leave this world without the last word. My name is Margaret Whitfield, I said, my voice low and even. The people outside this cabin are Claire Whitfield Cole and Ethan Cole. They invited me here. The door is locked from the outside. There is fire under the floor. If I die in this room, I want it recorded that it wasn't an accident. I paused and listened. The fire answered in crackles. Beyond the window glass, a figure moved closer to the porch. Ethan, tall and squared, his face turned toward the sill like a man checking the load on a trap. Thomas, I whispered to the air, if you are anywhere at all, give me another minute. A minute is a very long time if you spend it right. I dragged the chair back to the window, raised the poker again, and went at the sash with everything my small body had left. On the 4th blow, the latch jerked. On the 5th, the frame yawed and a sliver of cold agreed to enter. Somewhere outside, metal scraped on metal, the sound of a hasp shifting, a padlock nudging. Footsteps thudded on the porch. 2 sets. 1 stopped. 1 hesitated. Smoke curled in a dirty ribbon past my eyes. My lungs clawed. I held the poker like a spear, lifted my chin, and listened as a familiar voice on the other side of the door said 5 words that the brooch would carry to the cloud the moment it touched a signal down the mountain. Just make sure she's gone. The knob turned. The hasp clicked. The door began to open. And I smiled. Because when they came back, I was going to have proof. When the door finally swung open, I didn't bolt. I didn't scream. I didn't even cough, though smoke scraped my throat raw. Instead I stayed low, the iron poker clutched in my hand like a scepter, my eyes watering but sharp. Ethan's silhouette filled the doorway, broad and calm, as though nothing unusual was happening. He waved the smoke aside with one arm, then stepped in with that false confidence of his. Claire lingered behind him, her parka zipped high, her face pale. "Mom," Ethan said, his voice smooth, almost sympathetic. "You shouldn't be near the fire. Let's get you outside." Outside, where the hasp had been locked. Outside, where the trail cam faced the porch. Outside, where his voice had already been recorded saying words no son-in-law should ever say. I let him take my elbow, his grip firm but rehearsed, as if he were guiding an old woman across a street. My knees wobbled on purpose. A predator expects weakness. Give it to him until the bite breaks his teeth. Claire hovered at the threshold, her hands stuffed in her coat pockets. She looked everywhere but at me. I caught her eye once, and for a moment I saw my daughter, the little girl who used to fall asleep in the back seat of the station wagon after ballet class, her hair stuck to her cheeks. But then she blinked, and that girl was gone. "Why did you lock the door?" I croaked, my voice hoarse from the smoke. Ethan didn't flinch. "Safety, Maggie. Bears. Wanderers. You know this place. Can't be too careful." The lie was so casual it almost impressed me. Almost. By the time we reached the truck, the fire had grown behind us, snapping louder, clawing up the cabin walls. Ethan kept glancing back, his jaw tight. He had meant for the fire to finish the work. Instead, it was outpacing him. He shoved me into the back seat, Claire sliding in beside me without a word, and we jolted down the snowy track toward the main road. I sat back, scarf still pressed to my mouth, and thought of Rosa. She would wait in town until the time we had agreed. If I didn't show, she'd call Ben. And if I didn't call Ben, the dead man timer would do its work. Ethan thought he was corralling a feeble widow. What he was really doing was triggering every safeguard I'd spent 3 months building. We reached town after dark. Instead of driving home, Ethan pulled into the back lot of a shuttered diner. He killed the engine. The only sound was the ticking of the metal cooling and my own pulse thundering in my ears. "Mom," Claire said softly, finally meeting my eyes. "We need to go over the paperwork. Tonight." There it was. The mask slipping. No more pretense about family weekends or fresh mountain air. Just greed in plain clothes. "What paperwork?" I asked, though I already knew. Ethan twisted in the driver's seat, his smile almost apologetic. "The foundation accounts. The trusteeship. It's time to make sure Claire is listed as primary. It's just housekeeping." "Housekeeping doesn't require arson," I said evenly. For the first time, his smile cracked. "You're confused. The fire." "The fire you set under the floorboards," I cut in, my voice low but sharp. "The fire I have recorded." His jaw tightened. Claire sucked in a breath, her hand trembling on her lap. Ethan's eyes flicked to hers, then back to me. "What are you talking about?" "The dogwood brooch," I said, tapping my collar. "Pretty, isn't it? It also happens to hear better than I do. Every word you said outside that cabin is already safe, hundreds of miles away, waiting for my lawyer." Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Claire's face drained of color. Ethan's hand clenched the steering wheel so hard his knuckles whitened. "You wouldn't," he whispered. "I already did." We sat there, the three of us, locked in a silence thicker than the smoke had been. Finally, Ethan restarted the truck, his voice cold. "Then I guess we'll have to be careful." He drove me home like nothing had happened, but I saw it in the way his jaw pulsed, in the way Claire wouldn't look at me. They weren't giving up. They were regrouping. That night, I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table until the house was silent. My throat burned from smoke, my hands shook from adrenaline, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. They had shown me their plan. They thought fire and fear could erase me. Instead, they had given me evidence. And when they came back for more, I'd be ready. The next morning, the world looked deceptively ordinary. Sunlight spilled across the frosted lawn, the faint hum of traffic drifted from the road, and the smell of coffee rose from the pot I'd set to brew. But the ordinary had become a disguise. Beneath it pulsed a current of danger, of greed, of betrayal so deep I felt it down to the marrow of my bones. I sat at the kitchen table in my robe, hands wrapped around a mug, and forced myself to replay every detail of the night before. Smoke in my throat. Ethan's smooth voice insisting I was confused. Claire's pale face in the glow of the truck's headlights. The way his hands gripped the steering wheel like he wanted to snap it in two. My cabin, my retreat, was a blackened ruin now. I had built it with my late husband, stone by stone, board by board. Every nail had been hammered with hope. To them, it was just timber and land, an obstacle to their scheme. They didn't care about the memories that had been reduced to ashes, they only cared that I was supposed to burn with them. But I hadn't. And worse for them, I had proof. I opened my laptop, fingers trembling slightly as I typed in the encrypted login. The brooch's audio file had uploaded just as Rosa promised. I hit play, and Ethan's voice filled my quiet kitchen. "Lock it up tight. No one's going to believe her anyway. By the time anyone asks questions, the paperwork will be done, and the money will be ours." Claire's hesitant reply followed, brittle and thin. What if she survives?" Ethan laughed. "She won't. And even if she does, she won't be able to prove it." I paused the recording. My chest ached, but not from fear. From fury. I saved the file to 3 separate drives, uploaded it to a secure cloud under my attorney Ben's watch, and forwarded one copy to Rosa with a single note: insurance. The next step was patience. If I lunged too soon, I would spook them. Let them think they still had control. Let them show their hands again. I didn't have to wait long. By noon, Claire showed up at my house. She didn't call first. She just appeared, standing on the porch in her tan wool coat, her blonde hair pulled into a bun, her cheeks blotchy from the cold. She knocked lightly, like a guest, not like a daughter. When I opened the door, she forced a smile. "Mom, I came to check on you. After last night." Her eyes flicked over my shoulder, scanning the living room, the hallway. She wasn't here for me. She was here to assess, to measure what had survived the fire inside me. I let her in. She perched on the edge of the sofa, her hands twisting in her lap. Ethan told me you were upset, she began, her voice too rehearsed. The fire must have shaken you. We were all scared. I sat across from her, my face calm. Yes. Fires have a way of revealing things, don't they? Her eyes darted to mine. I held her gaze until she looked away. We thought, she said quickly, maybe it would be best if you considered signing over some of the more complicated accounts. Just to simplify things. You shouldn't be dealing with so much stress at your age. There it was. The first push. Stress, I repeated softly. You think simplifying my life means giving away what your father and I built? Claire's jaw tightened. It's not giving away. It's just transferring. To family. To me. Ethan can manage the rest. Family. She said it like a weapon, not a bond. I leaned forward, folding my hands. Claire, do you remember the first Christmas after your father passed? You and Damon came here with the kids. I burned the ham, and we ended up eating scrambled eggs by the fireplace. Her face softened for a flicker of a second. Yes. You told me that night that I was stronger than anyone you knew, that you wanted your children to grow up with that same strength. Do you remember? She swallowed. I was younger then. No, I said gently but firmly. You were honest then. What happened to that honesty, Claire? Her lips trembled, but before she could answer, Ethan appeared at the door. He didn't knock. He walked right in, tall, dark-haired, in his tailored overcoat, his smile sharp as broken glass. Margaret, he said smoothly. We're here to help. You don't need to carry this burden anymore. I sat back, studying them both. They thought they were wolves circling a wounded deer. But I had teeth of my own. I appreciate the offer, I said, standing. But I'll be keeping my affairs in order. Myself. Ethan's smile didn't falter, but his eyes hardened. That might not be wise. I walked them both to the door, my voice calm but my pulse steady with fire. I've lived long enough to know the difference between wise and weak. I'll call you when I need help. Until then, enjoy your evening. When the door closed behind them, I locked it. Then I exhaled, my hands shaking. Not from fear. From the restraint it took not to drag them both into the street and shout the truth for all the neighbors to hear. But not yet. Not yet. That night, I wrote in my journal, just as I had every night since Ethan married into our family. They think they can erase me. They think they can burn me into silence. But I am fireproof. Over the next week, they pressed harder. Calls from Ethan, each one dripping with false concern. Claire stopping by with home-cooked meals I didn't touch, her eyes darting always to the file cabinet, the safe, the desk. And then came the letter. A thick envelope, delivered by courier, embossed with the logo of a law firm Ethan often bragged about. Inside was a power of attorney document, crisp and clean, waiting for my signature. The letter attached said it was urgent to safeguard assets during a difficult transition. I held that paper in my hands and laughed. Not a soft laugh. A sharp, bitter laugh that filled the empty kitchen. I placed the envelope on the counter, snapped a photo, and sent it straight to Ben. His reply came within minutes. Do not sign. Come see me tomorrow. When I arrived at his office the next morning, he stood, his silver hair catching the light from the window, and shook my hand firmly. Margaret, I've suspected Ethan of circling for years. But this? This is attempted theft. I have proof, I whispered, and pulled the drive from my coat pocket. He listened to the recording with narrowed eyes, his jaw tightening with each word Ethan spoke. When it ended, he leaned back, exhaled, and tapped his pen on the desk. This isn't just family betrayal. This is criminal. If we release this, Ethan could face prison. And Claire. I closed my eyes, pain washing over me. My daughter. My own flesh and blood, caught in his orbit. Not yet, I said finally. We wait. We build. When they make their next move, we strike so hard they never recover. Ben nodded slowly. Then we prepare. Every account, every trust, every asset. Locked. Frozen. Accessible only by you, with my oversight. If Ethan tries again, it'll be like running headfirst into a wall. I left his office that day with a new kind of fire in my chest. Not the choking smoke of betrayal. The steady blaze of resolve. That evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across my lawn, I sat on the porch with a blanket across my lap. The air was cold, sharp. But I felt warm, almost untouchable. Because while Ethan and Claire thought they were tightening their grip, they didn't realize I was cutting the ropes beneath them. They would come back. Of course they would. But next time, when they stepped into my trap, I'd be the one holding the match. And the proof would burn brighter than any fire they could ever set. For a week, there was silence. Not a comfortable silence, not the kind you savor on a crisp morning with coffee in hand, but the eerie stillness of a storm building just beyond the horizon. Ethan and Claire didn't call, didn't stop by, didn't send their usual stream of polite intrusions masked as concern. But silence has weight, and by the 6th day I could feel it pressing against the walls of my house, suffocating, waiting to crack. It was Thursday evening when the storm broke. I had just finished dinner, grilled salmon, steamed broccoli, a modest glass of red wine. I was rinsing the dishes when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Claire. "Mom, please. Can we talk? Tonight. I'll come alone." Alone. That word carried more warning than comfort. But I replied, 8 p.m. The porch light will be on. When she arrived, she was wrapped in a dark green coat, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders, her eyes swollen like she'd been crying, or practicing how to look like she had. She stood on the porch, wringing her hands. "Come in," I said. My voice was even, my body still, though my heart drummed with anticipation. She walked inside slowly, glancing around as if the familiar rooms had turned foreign. She sat on the edge of the sofa like she was afraid it might bite her. "Mom," she began, her voice trembling. "Ethan, he's been pushing too hard. I know that. But you have to understand, he's only trying to secure our future. He thinks you don't trust us." I lowered myself into the chair opposite her, folding my hands in my lap. "Claire, trust is earned. Not demanded. And certainly not burned to the ground with matches and gasoline." Her eyes widened, her lips parting. She stammered, I don't know what you mean." "Yes you do," I said calmly. For a long moment, silence stretched between us. She blinked rapidly, her throat bobbing. Then she whispered, "He said it was the only way. He promised me nothing would happen to you. That it was just to scare you." I let her words hang in the air like smoke. She wanted me to absolve her, to sweep it under the rug as though betrayal could be softened with excuses. "You locked that door, Claire," I said quietly. "You held the key while I choked on smoke. Don't tell me you didn't know." Tears spilled down her cheeks. She buried her face in her hands. "I didn't know he'd go that far. I thought." "You thought $5 billion was worth the gamble." Her sobbing quieted into shallow breaths. Then slowly she looked up, her face streaked with tears but her eyes still sharp, still calculating. "If you just sign the transfer, this wouldn't have to keep going. We could move on. We could be a family again." There it was. Not guilt. Not remorse. A last desperate reach for the prize. I leaned forward, my voice like steel. "Claire, family doesn't come with conditions. And you already chose yours." The front door swung open then, slamming against the wall. Ethan stepped inside without hesitation, his overcoat dripping rain, his jaw tight, his eyes cold. "So," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "You finally told her, didn't you?" Claire flinched, but he didn't look at her. His gaze fixed on me, hard and unblinking. I stood, my posture steady. "You've overplayed your hand, Ethan. I have proof of everything. Every word you thought was buried in smoke." For the first time, his mask cracked. His nostrils flared, his mouth twisted. "You think anyone will believe you? You're old. Fragile. They'll say you're confused. Paranoid." I smiled faintly. "Maybe. But they'll believe your voice. They'll believe the recordings. The attempted signatures. The fire department report that shows the door was locked from the outside." He froze. Claire gasped. "You left a trail," I said softly. "And trails don't vanish. They lead straight to you." He took one step toward me. "Then give us what we want before it ruins everything." I raised my chin. No. I'll give you something else instead. A choice. His brows knitted, confusion flickering. Leave now, I said, my tone calm, deliberate. Disappear. Start over somewhere far away. Or stay, and watch everything you've built crumble when the truth comes out. The room was silent but for the ticking of the clock. Rain pattered against the windows. Claire's breath hitched, caught between sobs and silence. Ethan stared at me, his chest rising and falling in shallow bursts. Finally, he sneered. You won't do it. You don't have the nerve. I smiled again, faint but sure. You'll find out soon enough. He grabbed Claire's arm and yanked her toward the door. She stumbled after him, her eyes wide with panic. And then they were gone, the slam of the door echoing in the hollow silence. I stood there, heart pounding, breath shallow. My hands trembled, but not from fear. From adrenaline. From victory, even if it was still only half won. That night, I called Ben. He answered on the second ring. It's time, I said. The next morning, we met in his office. He had already drafted the paperwork. Emergency injunctions. Asset freezes. Legal protections stacked like bricks around me, impenetrable. They'll come back again, he warned. Desperate men always do. I nodded. Let them. This time, I'll be ready. And I was. 3 days later, Ethan and Claire returned, not to my house, but to the courthouse. They filed a petition, claiming I was no longer fit to manage my estate. That I was slipping, confused, vulnerable. That for the sake of the family, they needed immediate access. They didn't know I'd already been tipped off. Ben had friends at the courthouse who called us the moment the paperwork was filed. We sat in his office, side by side, reviewing every line, every lie. They've underestimated you, Ben said, a grim smile on his lips. They've handed us exactly what we needed. Proof of intent. Proof of fraud. And when the hearing date arrived, I walked into that courtroom not as a frail old woman, but as a survivor, armed with fireproof evidence. The judge listened as their lawyer painted me as confused, weak, incapable. Claire sat pale and silent beside Ethan, who spoke with his usual slick confidence. But when Ben stood and played the recording, the laughter, the plan, the admission, it was like pouring water on their fire. The courtroom fell silent. The judge's eyes narrowed. Mr. Collins, he said sternly, this recording is your voice, is it not? Ethan stammered, his face flushing red. He tried to deny it, but the weight of the evidence was crushing. Claire sobbed quietly, her head bowed. And I sat tall, my silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights, my hands steady in my lap. For the first time in months, I felt the scales of justice tilt back toward balance. But I knew it wasn't finished. Not yet. Because people like Ethan don't give up with one loss. They dig deeper, claw harder, burn hotter. And I had to be ready, for the final strike. The day after the hearing, the sun rose over my house like nothing had changed, but inside me, everything had shifted. For months, I had lived with fear simmering beneath my skin, every shadow a reminder of fire, every silence a warning. But now? Now the silence was mine again. Ethan and Claire had slunk out of that courtroom beaten, but not finished. I saw it in his eyes when the judge ruled against them, freezing my accounts under my sole control and scheduling further review for their conduct. Ethan's jaw clenched, his nostrils flared, his fists balled at his sides. That man wasn't done. And sure enough, the storm arrived one last time. It was a Saturday night when I heard the tires crunching on the gravel outside my house. I set my teacup down and straightened in my chair. Through the lace curtains, I saw Ethan's black SUV in the driveway, headlights glaring, engine idling. The passenger door opened, and Claire stepped out slowly. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. Ethan followed, slamming the door, his coat collar turned up against the cold. I had been waiting for this. Ben had warned me they might try something reckless when cornered. And cornered was exactly what they were. The knock rattled the front door. Not a polite tap. A pounding, demanding fist. I opened it. Not wide, just enough to meet their eyes. Let us in, Ethan barked. I tilted my head. Why would I? He pushed past me, dragging Claire inside. She stumbled over the threshold, eyes darting around the room as though searching for escape. You think you've beaten us? Ethan snarled, towering over me. You embarrassed me in court. You froze the accounts. But you can't stop me. That money, he jabbed a finger toward me, should have been ours. I closed the door behind him, my heart beat steady. You keep saying ours, Ethan. But all I see is yours. His face twisted, red with rage. Claire whispered, please, Ethan. But he silenced her with a sharp glare. He turned back to me. Sign over the accounts. Right now. Tonight. Do that, and no one else gets hurt. I smiled faintly. You're standing in my home, threatening me. Do you really think I'm afraid anymore? His eyes narrowed. He reached into his coat and pulled out a flash drive, holding it up like a weapon. You're not the only one with recordings, Margaret. You think you're clever, hiding your fortune, building trusts. I have files too, statements, letters, things that make you look senile, incompetent. When I release these, no judge will believe a word you say. They'll strip you of control. You'll lose everything. Claire whimpered softly, her hand covering her mouth. I stepped closer, so near I could see the sweat beading on his forehead. Then do it, I said quietly. His brow furrowed. What? Release them. Show the world your lies. Because when you do, Ethan, every real piece of evidence I've collected, your voice, your attempt at murder, your fraud, will flood into the light. And the world will see you not as a son-in-law, not as a businessman, but as a criminal. He froze. His jaw clenched. His fist shook around the flash drive. You underestimate me, I continued, my voice steady as steel. I built a billion-dollar empire from nothing. I survived loss, betrayal, cancer, fire. Do you really think I'd let a greedy little man like you tear it down? The silence between us was razor-sharp. Then Claire broke it, her voice cracking. Ethan, stop. Please. We've already lost. He spun toward her, his face contorted with fury. Shut up, Claire. But she didn't. For the first time, she stood tall. Tears streaked her face, but her voice was firm. I can't do this anymore. I won't. She turned to me, her eyes pleading. I'm sorry, Margaret. I should have stopped him. I should have walked away. I was weak. But I'm done now. Ethan's chest heaved, rage radiating off him in waves. He lifted the flash drive like he might smash it against the wall. But then, he froze. Because behind him, the faint click of a camera shutter echoed. He spun around, and there in the corner of the room, stood Ben. Calm. Collected. Holding up a small recorder. Got all of that, Ben said evenly. Every threat. Every word. That's enough to bury you for good. Ethan's face drained of color. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, but no words came out. I stepped past him, joining Ben. You see, Ethan, I said, the fire taught me something. Proof doesn't vanish. It multiplies. And tonight, you just gave me more than I ever needed. Claire sank onto the sofa, sobbing quietly into her hands. Ethan stood rigid, his eyes darting between us, realizing the walls had finally closed in. Leave, I said softly but firmly. Walk out that door and don't come back. Because the next time I see you, it won't be in this living room. It'll be in a courtroom, and you won't walk out free. For a long, trembling moment, he didn't move. Then slowly, he dropped the flash drive onto the floor, turned, and stormed out into the night. Claire followed, her sobs echoing against the hallway walls. The door slammed shut, and silence reclaimed the house. I stood there, breathing deeply, feeling the weight of years lifting off my shoulders. Ben placed a steady hand on my arm. It's over, he said quietly. But I knew it wasn't just over. It was finished. The next morning, Ben filed the recordings with the authorities. Fraud. Attempted arson. Conspiracy. Ethan had nowhere left to hide. By the end of the week, his consulting firm had cut ties with him, his clients pulled out, and his reputation was in tatters. Claire filed for divorce within days. She sent me a letter, long handwritten, shaking with remorse. I didn't reply. Some wounds need silence, not words. And me? I rebuilt. Not the kind of rebuilding that comes with bricks or steel, but the kind that grows inside. I fortified my estate, secured the foundations of my fund, and doubled the resources aimed at women over 50 building new lives. I poured my strength not into revenge, but into legacy. Months later, I stood in a hotel ballroom as the Rowan Women's Fund launched its first major initiative. Dozens of women filled the room, teachers, nurses, mothers, dreamers, each with plans, each with grit, each with hope. As I looked around, I saw not loss but abundance. When I stepped up to the podium, I didn't mention Ethan. I didn't mention betrayal. I spoke of resilience, of rising from smoke, of refusing to let greed define us. And as the applause washed over me, I felt something settle deep inside. Peace. Not silence born of fear, but quiet earned by fire. That night, alone in my room, I stood by the window with a cup of tea, watching the city lights twinkle like stars. The flames that once threatened to consume me had instead forged me stronger. My son-in-law tried to trap me in fire for $5 billion. But when the smoke cleared, it wasn't my fortune that defined me. It was my proof, my strength, my refusal to bend. And in the end, it wasn't him who wrote the final chapter. It was me.